tariffs that are now in effect, went into effect at midnight after Trump signed them yesterday in a ceremony at the Rose Garden. Well, earlier today, just a little bit ago, actually, I spoke with Francisco Sanchez. He's the former U.S. Undersecretary of Commerce for Trade. We talked about the impact of these tariffs.
Garrett, first of all, it's good to be with you, and it is sweeping. This is the biggest change to trade policy, and I'd say international economic policy, in probably 100 years for the United States. So it is sweeping. It is very significant.
We saw this morning when the stock market opened up, it really took a dive. I would imagine that response to this does not surprise you.
Well, it doesn't. One of the things that business looks for after making money is certainty. And this creates a lot of uncertainty in the business community, particularly manufacturing companies that have international supply chains. So yeah, it did not surprise me because of the uncertainty that a lot of businesses are going to face, certainly at least in the short term.
So what happens now for many of these businesses?
Well, they have decisions to make. Some of them, the larger companies, a Walmart, for example, has the buying power to tell its overseas suppliers that they have to absorb the cost of these tariffs. But that's the exception to the rule, I believe. Not every company has the buying power of a Walmart. And I don't know that Walmart can sustain that over time, but certainly in the near term, a large company like Walmart can probably tell many of its overseas suppliers that they're going to need to absorb these costs. For many other businesses, they will either have to increase their prices to cover manufacturing costs, or look for alternative supply chains, preferably within the U.S. I don't think that's something that most businesses will be able to do in the near term, but over time, that may be a preferred solution to raising prices, is to tweak their supply chains to try to minimize the impact of the tariffs.
And that certainly seems like that's what the president is wanting to see from all of this. But how you kind of touched on it there. It sounds like there could be some pain for consumers for a while.
Well, the supply chains have generally been in place for a while for many of these companies, and in many cases, there may not be readily available inputs. For example, if you're a manufacturer in the United States and part of your supply chain comes from overseas, it may come because it's cheaper to buy overseas, but it could also be that there's just not sufficient supply or any supply of a particular input for the United States. So to the extent that you're going to seek to try to integrate your supply chain entirely or primarily within the United States, it's going to take time. It's not something that you can do overnight.
We keep hearing about the historic nature of this. You have a lot of experience in this area. Have you ever seen anything like this?
Not in my lifetime. The last time that the United States had this kind of a significant tariff increase was in the 20s under the Smoot-Hawley Act. And the president's tariffs are actually even larger than those. So no, certainly not in my lifetime. And I'd say probably nearly 100 years, we have not seen this significant a change in trade policy.
So where do things go from here, do you think?
Well, I believe that the president is going to pay close attention to how American businesses are responding. How is this impacting them? I think at some point, if it seems to be working for his objectives, and I think it's worth touching on what the president is hoping to achieve with this. One is he wants, to the extent possible, if you're selling in the United States, he wants you to make the products you're selling in the United States. So if he sees a trend toward that, I think he's going to stick to his guns. If he sees that this is detrimental to the economy over a sustained period, he's probably going to receive a lot of pressure to, if not reconsider, at least pull back a bit. Certainly on critical inputs to continue to maintain manufacturing. I think we have to wait and see what kind of reaction countries give. If there's a retaliatory response where other countries are increasing their tariffs on U.S. goods, that'll certainly have an adverse impact and could very well also cause the U.S. government to evaluate if they should stay on the track. But I'd say in the near term, I would not expect any big changes. We're probably talking over the next 6 to 12 months that before the president reconsiders, if at all.
The president has vowed a couple of things to reduce the reliance on foreign goods, but he has also pledged to lower prices on things. Are both of those objectives possible at the same time when we're seeing this tariff policy?
Well, Garrett, as I mentioned, a lot of U.S. manufacturing is reliant on an international supply chain. That is to say that in order to build or manufacture the goods that they make, they rely, at least in part, on products that come from overseas. If those products have a tariff imposed on them, they're going to increase the cost of production and ultimately the in cost of their final product. So I'd say in the near term and medium term, that's going to be hard to achieve. It's certainly in the manufacturing side. Perhaps over time, if the president's objective is met by bringing more manufacturing back to the United States, it could potentially bring prices down, but that's not a guarantee. Labor costs here and other related costs are such that it's not certain that bringing manufacturing here across sectors would necessarily bring prices down.
We're going to take a break here on Fox 35 News Plus, but we will be right back after this.
watching Fox 35 News Plus, streaming on Fox Local.
Welcome back into Fox 35 News Plus. I'm Garrett Wymer, and thanks for joining us. So we want to play for you a little bit from this live stream of the Colorado State University hurricane season forecast. There were some issues with the live stream, so we're going to go back a little bit and play for you as Phil Klotzbach kind of walks us through what that forecast is. So let's go ahead and listen in from moments ago here.
They only make up about a quarter or 20 to 25% of all the storms, and in a year they do about 80 to 85% of the damage. We also forecast accumulated cyclone energy. That's an integrated hurricane wind energy metric that accounts for storm, basically longevity and intensity. If you're a baseball fan, it's kind of like the OPS of hurricanes. I'll be sure to throw in a few baseball references throughout this talk. My mentor, Dr. Bill Gray, who some of you had who some of you may have met a few times. I was a huge baseball fan. I'll mention Dr. Gray quite a bit throughout this presentation as well. A new metric we started forecasting a couple of years ago is the accumulated cyclone energy in the western half of the Atlantic Basin. Why we focus on that separately from the basin is because that's where people live, that's where property is, and obviously then you're getting more closely tied to impacts, which is what, if you were here yesterday and you heard Ryan talk, what he was focusing on some with his presentation yesterday. So when it comes to seasonal forecasting, though, a lot of people say this is how we do it. And actually, this cartoon, which was 2007, is perfect. See, verily we see 17 named storms. So this is Dr. Gray, again, my mentor. That's not how we do these seasonal forecasting. I do tell I've told people that, my mom, when I was born, said, hey, look, this guy's going to be a meteorologist. He's going to be a forecaster, so we're going to name him Phil after the groundhog. That's not how we do our seasonal forecasts. We use a lot of weather and climate data and historical information to come up with these forecasts. We also now use a lot of model forecast data that today Dr. Gray wouldn't have had available to him when he started doing these forecasts back in the early 1980s. So this can be summarized in a couple of quotes from the legendary Yogi Berra. First of all, it is tough to make predictions, especially about the future. I think a few people have said that, and Ryan said, attributed it to Niels Bohr. Forecasting the future is hard, right? Whether you're forecasting weather, whether you're forecasting sporting events, political races, all that stuff, it's hard. But we also find that you can see a lot by looking. Basically, by going back into the past, there are clues in the atmosphere-ocean system that can tip us off as to whether the current hurricane season is going to have above or below normal activity. There are these precursor signals. I'm going to try to convince you of that in this next plot. And here what we're looking at is June and July, so basically right prior to when the season really ramps up. In busy seasons minus quiet seasons. And this was the way Dr. Gray used to always say, if there's any signal, you basically take the top 10, difference the bottom 10, and if there's no signal, then basically it's just not really predictable. But there are kind of coherent spatial patterns in these sea surface temperatures. So in busier seasons, we tend to have a warmer tropical Atlantic. Makes sense, its hurricanes live off of that warm ocean water. If we look in the tropical Pacific, we see cold water in the eastern and central part of the Pacific, warm water in the western Pacific. That's kind of your canonical La Nina-like pattern. And so Dr. Gray, when he was starting doing this research on seasonal hurricane prediction, he was teaching a tropical meteorology class, and this is long before the day and age of Wikipedia. This is back in the good old Encyclopedia Britannica days, but he knew which years were busy hurricane seasons. He knew which years had El Nino conditions, and he said, hey, when we have El Nino conditions in the eastern and central tropical Pacific, we tend to get fewer hurricanes in the Atlantic. And so the question then became, well, why would something going on in the Pacific Ocean impact hurricanes in the Atlantic Ocean thousands of miles away? So obviously, I'm sure most of you are very familiar with El Nino and La Nina. El Nino is warmer than normal water in the eastern and central tropical Pacific. La Nina basically colder than normal water in that same region. And why that matters is because of what it does to the thunderstorm activity across the Pacific Ocean. So in a La Nina, or kind of the average pattern, is that you get your strongest thunderstorms near Indonesia, where the waters in the Pacific Ocean are the warmest. In an El Nino, those water temperatures get warm farther to the east, so those thunderstorms shift farther east. And what you end up with is a change in
so that is Phil Klotzbach talking us through the Colorado State hurricane forecast. We broke that down with Brooks. You can also find that full breakdown right now on fox35orlando.com and in the Fox Local app. We're going to take another break here on Fox 35 News Plus, but we will be right back after this.
watching Fox 35 News Plus, streaming on Fox Local.
The state of Florida has 2 new Congress members in Washington, D.C., representing their districts in the U.S. House of Representatives. And no one is happier about that than House Speaker Mike Johnson, who now has a little bit larger of a Republican majority, thanks to new members, Congressmember Jimmy Patronis of Florida's 1st District and Randy Fine of Florida's 6th District. Speaker Johnson swore in those 2 members of Congress yesterday evening.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that you take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which you are about to enter, so help you God?
I do.
Congratulations, you're now members of the 119th Congress.
So Jimmy Patronis and Randy Fine, both fresh off of roughly 14-point wins in their districts. You saw them with Senators Rick Scott and Ashley Moody there. You also saw Mike Herodopoulos, Byron Donalds as well, a congressman who is running for governor here in Florida, and in fact just got the endorsement in that race from Speaker Mike Johnson. Now, moments after he was sworn in, a new Congressman Jimmy Patronis did speak on the floor of the House of Representatives. He outlined some plans to support President Trump's agenda, and he also thanked his family.
Mr. Speaker, it's an honor here to be representing the men and women of Florida's 1st Congressional District. As a lifelong native of the Florida Panhandle, I'm ready to get to work to support President Trump's agenda to make America first, to protect our southern border, to make groceries affordable, strengthen our military, and provide much-needed support to our veterans. Without my family, I wouldn't be here today. So I'd like to give special thank you to my beautiful wife, Katie, my boys, Johnny and Theo, and all of the great friends and supporters who made the trip to our nation's capital. Mr. Speaker, with a Republican majority here in Congress, President Trump and the White House, we've got the opportunity of a lifetime to fix this country so our children grow up in a nation that's safe and full of opportunities. So I'm ready to get our fiscal house in order. As a former chief financial officer for the state of Florida, I oversaw the state's budget for nearly a decade. I know what it takes to make sure we have a growing economy with a stabilized budget. I've always believed that people in America spend their money better than Washington, D.C. does. In fact, I can't believe the greatness that we're saddling our children with an unbearable amounts of debt. And the president's efforts to root out fraud, waste, abuse, and is critical to restoring trust in our nation's government. For far too long, Americans have sent their hard-earned tax dollars to Washington without really feeling like they're getting anything for it. Frankly, Washington's been indifferent to the needs of families throughout this country, and we've got an opportunity to fix a lifetime of issues for the better. Like I've said, I'm a workhorse, not a show horse. I'm ready to get to work, my colleagues in this country, together to get this country out of the ditch and returning it to greatness. May God bless America.
So that was new Congressman Jimmy Patronis speaking last night, and then just moments after that, Congressman Randy Fine of Florida's 6th District gave his first address on the floor of the House. He also thanked his family, thanked his colleagues for supporting his campaign as well, and talked about the path to Congress.
35 years ago, a 16-year-old boy walked through those doors, and he marveled in this room at this temple of democracy as he watched people who gave of their lives, who gave up time with their families, who gave up their careers in order to serve their country. When I spent a year working here as a House page, I learned from so many people, 5 of whom, by the way, are still serving today, what it meant to serve America, what it meant to put the needs of the country before yourself. I want to recognize my family because when I did this opportunity, being a good Jewish boy, my family would not send me alone. My mother, my father, my sister, they moved to Washington. And my mom, who I'll talk about in a little bit, used to sit where Wendy, my father, I want to recognize them. Thank you so much for being here. My sons who are over there. But my mom used to sit up there and she used to watch me every day. And she used to tell me, Randy, that God has a plan. Now, I believe that when Donald Trump's life was saved in Butler, Pennsylvania, it was